John?
Hi, how you doing? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, good.
Well, I thank you so much for your fourth visit. Four visits.
Is it really?
Fourth visit on RMG's Rhymes Reasons, and we appreciate very much what you do. We are talking to, ladies and gentlemen, John Kiriakou, former CIA officer and whistleblower who told us about the enhanced torture program of the U.S. government. And when I read your story, I made sure that I wrote several pieces about it, and I made sure that the public could come to at least somewhat of an understanding of the sacrifices that you and your family made, and still makes to this day, and sacrifices that all whistleblowers make when they go against the big bad, the biggest, baddest bully on the block, the U.S. government. So what I'm going to do today, John, is I'm going to pick your brain about some of the things we see taking place right now.
Sure.
And so there has been this narrative that because it seems that the deep state isn't that in love with Donald Trump, that somehow Donald Trump is the champion of the people, that they go to this dichotomy, that if the deep state hates you, then you're a good guy. If the deep state likes you, then you're a bad guy. So this dichotomy they have, where there's no nuance, where we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. Give me your insights on, because I know you've paid attention to this as well. Give us your insights on this. How do you make sense of this?
I've actually written about this a couple of times. This is something that's funny to me, because so many Americans feel like they have to choose a side, that if you're anti-Trump, you have to be pro-CIA and FBI. And conversely, if you are pro-Trump, that you have to be anti-CIA and FBI. Mm-hmm. You know, you can have a scenario where there's just simply no good guy, where they should all be ashamed of themselves. There really is a deep state. It probably is trying to take down this president, but that doesn't mean that the president deserves our support.
And in those writings, what do you attribute to this need to have to embrace one or the other?
Yeah.
I mean, what do you attribute that to? Is it the partisan nonsense we've been going through since, I don't know, forever? I mean, what?
In part, I think that it is part of the abject partisanship that we seem to find ourselves in. And in part, I think it's a part of human nature to want to have your own views validated. And so we tend to seek out like-minded people. We tend to seek out people who have the same core beliefs that we have and the same political analysis that we espouse. And it's easier to do that, and probably more dangerous to do that, because of the advent of social media. Right. So many of us have Facebook pages or Instagram or Twitter, and we want people to like our posts or to retweet or to share, because it validates us and it makes us think that we're right.
And in some way it makes sense out of a very chaotic world. That somehow I've been validated through this. I mean, I've never understood that. Now, those of us who use the internet and social media to do the work that we do, to make impact, not just trying to get more likes or get more followers, but to make impact. I think that sometimes there's this thin line between wanting to be liked and really wanting to make an impact, because sometimes those do get conflated. that there are people who do have a lot of followers because they are actually making an impact, not because they have this need to be validated on social media.
That's right. That's right. In fact, I follow a lot of people on social media who I don't know, but I value their opinions. I enjoy their analysis. I think they have a lot going for them, and I just feel like a better informed person because of it.
Right, right. Now, let me ask you a question, because you have expertise in this field. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have not read his book, Doing Time Like a Spy, I would make sure you do. I would make sure you get that book. You have expertise in this field. So, I mean, I want you to, give us some sort of, we talk about inside baseball here. Sure. When I look at what's taking place in Russia, I have my own ideas and thoughts about why there's been this big push against Russia. And I want you to explain. I'll get into what I think, but you're the guest. Tell us, if you have the expertise of a spy, what would you attribute to this push against Russia, this villainization of Russia?
Yeah.
Is it, is it some sort of, quote unquote false flag? Is it some sort of, misdirection here? What would you, as a trained CIA officer, say this was about? Or as a trained CIA officer, I know, maybe, a little bit of something about this?
So I think my answers are yes and yes.
Okay, do tell.
I think the core of this is entirely political. We need to have a boogeyman. We need to have a common enemy around whom we can rally, or against whom we can rally.
Right.
And the Russians are so easy, as are the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Cubans, the Iranians. But the Russians, people understand. Americans understand the Russians. We've been the enemies of the Russians for a very long time, and so they're easy to bully, and they're easy to blame for our problems. I've been so intrigued by this whole Russiagate thing, and it's because I'm just not seeing it.
Right.
After I left the CIA, I was the senior investigator on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And that's the premier prestige committee on Capitol Hill.
Right.
So in order to be a serious investigator, in order to really be taken seriously by the Congress and by the media, you have to do serious investigations. And so I was always looking for the facts.
Right.
Sure, I had my own political views, but you have to just go where the facts lead you. So not to take too much of your time, but let's look at this so-called...
No, take as much time as you want. Go right ahead.
We'll start with Mike Flynn. In December of 2016, after Donald Trump was elected president, Benjamin Netanyahu asked his UN ambassador to ask Mike Flynn to ask the Russians, if you can follow this, veto Barack Obama's Security Council resolution opposing Israeli settlements. Okay? So Flynn went to the Russians and asked them if they would veto. The Russians said no. That was the end of it. Now, Flynn lied about that to the FBI, and he's had to take a felony plea because of it. But that wasn't Russian interference. That was Israeli interference. But we're not talking about Israeli interference. AIPAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee, is probably the single most important, single wealthiest, and most active lobbying firm in America. It works solely on behalf of the government of Israel, yet it is not registered as a representative of a foreign government. Why is that? That's Israeli meddling in American elections. Now, if you look at what the Russians have been accused of, they were accused of spending $100,000 on Facebook ads. Half of that money, $50,000 of that money, was spent after the election was over.
Right.
Half of the half, or 25,000, was spent in states that were solidly red or solidly blue, so they had no effect on the election. That leaves $25,000 to sway the U.S. election. $25,000. When I was at the CIA, $50,000 was my petty cash that I kept in my safe for spending money. So if people think that the Russians could throw the election for $25,000, that Americans are so stupid and so gullible as to be influenced by $25,000 worth of Facebook ads, then we're in a sorrier shape than most of us have previously thought. So, I'm just not seeing evidence of real Russian intervention in our elections. Now, do countries seek to involve themselves in elections? Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Have Russians? Probably. Yeah. So have the Americans and the Chinese and the British and the French and the Israelis and everybody else. That's what countries do. That's what intelligence services do. But if you're going to make an accusation against a world superpower, an accusation of an international crime, you have to put up. And if you can't put up, then you have to shut up.
All right.
But so far, no one has given us any evidence, real evidence, of Russian hacking or Russian collusion.
Very good. Now, I'm going to ask you to see if, I'm on the right track here. I looked at this when it happened. I looked at it for three reasons as to why this happened. I'll start with, the least consequential one first. Hillary Clinton had to be able to justify to her donors who gave an exorbitant amount of money to her in order to win this election in 2016, that someone had to be the fall guy for this loss, this big loss that came in 2016, this historic loss in 2016. That's the first thing I saw when I looked at this, that this is why somehow, Russia becomes the bad guy. The second thing I looked at was, and like I said, you tell me if you think I'm on the wrong track here or not. The second thing I looked at was, Russia has been a staunch supporter of the Assad government in Syria, going directly against the U.S. government. And so wouldn't it indeed be able to justify whatever military action you take against Russia, whatever you try to do against Russia in that regard, that since you vilified them as being the one that stole your election, then it's much easier to justify your actions against them going forward when it comes to Syria. And thirdly, my last reason was that, to me, because Obama and the Democratic Party started this line when it came to Russiagate, was that this was the big payback for Russia taking in Edward Snowden. These were the things that came to me. Now, does it sound like I'm on the wrong track here with any of those assessments?
I think you're exactly on the right track, and it's more than that. I'll add two things.
Go right.
It was also for U.S. involvement in Ukraine, where we helped to depose a government that sought rapprochement with Russia and replaced it with a pro-Western, pro-U.S., pro-NATO right-wing government. The Russians are neo-Nazi government, precisely correct. The Russians are panicked at the notion of NATO being right there, literally on their border. And the other thing is the U.S. is really upset about Russian activism in the Middle East. When I was still at the CIA, U.S. policy was, and this was carried out mostly by the State Department, but U.S. policy was that we never work with the Russians in the Middle East because the goal was to keep the Russians out of the Middle East. We didn't want there to be two superpowers in the Middle East. We wanted to be the ones that called the shots. And, I remember when the Middle East peace process was taking off, I was serving in Bahrain, which is a little country, an island nation in the Persian Gulf.
Right.
And the Middle East peace process, of course, was multilateral, and it included the Russians. Well, the Bahrainis were hosting the Middle East peace process talks on the environment, and they had set up an environmental center there that included Israeli diplomats. So my instructions were to go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and formally invite them to the meeting. Well, because the talks were multilateral, I was supposed to go with my Russian counterpart. And my orders came from the State Department to not call the Russian embassy and just to do it alone. And so I did. And then, of course, I got an angry call from the Russians saying, hey, why did you do this? This is supposed to be multilateral. We're all supposed to be a part of this peace process. And what am I supposed to say? I'm sorry, we were joking, or I'm sorry, we say one thing and then we do another.
Right.
But the bottom line was that the policy was to keep the Russians out. And that policy is consistent to this day.
Across the board with Democratic and Republican presidents.
Across the board. This is a national policy, not a partisan.
Exactly. Now, you mentioned NATO, so this segues into a question that has been heavy on my mind. What is your knowledge, seeing that Facebook and Twitter now, since this anti-prop law was attached to the National Defense Authorization Act back in 2016, Christmas Eve, by the way, Merry Christmas of 2016. What is your view and what is your understanding for those of us who may not be hip to the Atlantic Council?
Right.
What is your understanding of their purpose, their role, their agenda?
Oh boy, that is such an important question, and this is something that almost no Americans know or understand. The Atlantic Council, and it's not just the Atlantic Council, it's the Council on Foreign Relations, the Hudson Institute, the American Enterprise Institute, the Center for Progress, the Center for Democracy.
Right.
I mean, there are so many so-called think tanks here in the Washington area that take their funding from the State Department, the Defense Department, defense contractors, the CIA. So they're biased. And what they end up doing is reinforcing one another. I'll give you an example. I'm, I guess, technically a journalist. And so I'm registered as a journalist with the State Department. And I receive the State Department's morning briefing email every day. And what they do at the State Department's Office of Public Affairs or Bureau of Public Affairs is they will refer you to a number, sometimes as many as a half a dozen different think tanks to see what's going on that day. So they'll say things like, well, we're looking at the Middle East peace process, and the Middle East Institute has a lunch at 12 o'clock, and they're going to talk about Syria, and you should go to that. Or the Hudson Institute is going to be talking about the Chinese naval operations in the South China Sea at 2 o'clock. You should go to that. So what they do is they fund these organizations like the Atlantic Council. And I should add, too, that NATO also funds the Atlantic Council.
Right.
So what they do is they fund these organizations, and then they refer you back to these organizations where they can parrot back their policy to you and make it look like it's independent. Yeah, that it's not just you getting their position from two different sides, that here's an independent think tank and they're telling you that our policy is right. Well, paying that think tank to parrot back the policy. So the whole system is corrupt. The whole system is dishonest.
What, if anything, any differences? I mean, whether it be minor, whether it be major, what differences have you seen in the past, since Trump was inaugurated? What differences do you see in how the intelligence agencies run? Is there any difference at all?
Well, it depends. In terms of differences at the top of the major intelligence organizations, no. Because you've got Mike Pompeo, who's a Donald Trump loyalist, heading the CIA. You have Dan Coats, who's a lifelong Republican Party functionary, as Director of National Intelligence. I said Pompeo was at the CIA. I meant at State Department.
Okay.
And then you have Gina Haspel, who is a career CIA professional who owes her career to Donald Trump as CIA director. So at those topmost positions, no, I don't think that there's really any difference between this administration and the last one, or even the one before that. With that said, at the working level, yes, I think there's a big difference. I think that the deep state is real. There really is such a thing as the deep state.
Right.
I think it seeks to destabilize this president. But at the same time, these guys at the CIA in the Senior Intelligence Service, they've been there for 25, 30, 35 years. They're not going anywhere.
Right.
They're not political appointees. They're career.
Right.
And they know they can outweight this president.
Right.
If they don't like this president, like they didn't like Bill Clinton and they didn't like Jimmy Carter, they know that he's going to go.
Right.
Whether it's 2 years from now or 6 years from now, he's going to go. And they're still going to be there. And so what they do is they slow roll everything. And what I mean by that is maybe they don't target that really risky source. Maybe they don't begin that really risky operation. Maybe they don't work hard to provide the finest analysis. Maybe they just go through the motions and just wait until this president is gone. And then they can cultivate a president that they like and that likes them. And let me add something else, too, about Barack Obama.
Okay.
People used to ask me this question all the time. Like, why was Obama as staunchly pro-CIA as he was? I mean, Obama gave the CIA literally anything and everything that it asked for. Drones and weapons, special operations, and you name it. By God, the CIA was allowed to do it. And the reason is because the CIA loves new presidents that have no intelligence experience.
Right.
And it's because the day after the election, the president-elect is entitled to a PDB briefing, President's Daily Brief.
Right.
And that's when you get the most highly classified information available. So when you see your first blue border report or black border report, where you're 6 levels above top secret, and the briefer says, Mr. President-elect, let me tell you about all the cool things we're doing around the world. Well, they've sucked you right in. They've recruited you.
Right.
And that's exactly what they seek to do. They seek to make you one of the guys. And once you're one of the guys, you're going to let them have and do anything they want. But they never expected Donald Trump to get elected. And then they never expected to get caught spying on the Trump campaign. And we've had admissions. I mean, they're sort of backhanded admissions, but admissions by the FBI that that's exactly what they were doing. FISA warrants on Carter Page, and then they put a source inside the campaign to report back to the FBI. I mean, that's just unheard of. It's unprecedented.
And remind us, John, what president were you prosecuted under?
That's a great question. It was Barack Obama that prosecuted me, and not just me, but 7 other national security whistleblowers. Ed, the Espionage Act was written in 1917 to combat German spies during the First World War. This law is so old that it doesn't even mention the term classified information because it's written 40 years before the classification system was even invented.
Right.
It mentions national defense information, but it doesn't define it. It says that a person is guilty of espionage if he provides national defense information to any person not entitled to receive it. That is so broadly written that I believe it to be unconstitutional. With that said, really nobody has had standing to challenge it to the Supreme Court. And certainly Congress doesn't have the guts to do anything because you're not going to win votes by challenging the Espionage Act of all things. Yeah. And so, it was inevitable that we were going to get a president at some point. I regret and lament the fact that it was Barack Obama, who was going to use the Espionage Act as a political weapon. And so between 1917 and 2009, 3 Americans were charged with espionage for cooperating with the media. Just during the Obama administration, 8 of us, almost 3 times the number of all previous presidents combined, 8 of us were prosecuted by the Obama administration.
The constitutional lawyer.
Yeah, the constitutional lawyer.
Yes.
The champion of the left.
Yeah.
You know, I believed in the whole hope and change thing. I really did. I volunteered on the campaign. I voted for Obama. I took my kids to the inauguration to see this, historic event. And it all turned out to be just a big lie.
Yeah.
It's a book that was written by Mark Halpern and John Heilemann called Double Down, about the 2012 election. It was a sequel to their book on the 2008 election. And President Obama agreed to sit for an interview for Double Down. And he said 2 things that were just chilling. First, he said very matter-of-factly, I never said I was a liberal.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when you think about it, that's true. Yeah. We believed he was a liberal, but he never said he was, and it turned out he wasn't. The other thing is he was talking about the drone program, and he said, I never had any idea that I would be so good at killing people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was chilling. Oh, my goodness, it was chilling.
When you look at the last month of the George W. Bush administration, Bush killed 2 people with the use of a drone in his last month. Obama's last month as president, he killed 424 people with drones. If that doesn't put things into perspective, I don't know what does.
Well, as we've been talking, we received some breaking news. Nikki Haley, UN ambassador, resigned.
She sure did.
Yeah. So, what are your thoughts on that? And what is that a sign of? I mean, this is before the midterms, and your UN ambassador resigns. What's up with that?
I have a couple of thoughts on this. Nikki Haley was simply not taken seriously around the world. Yeah. And she was loved in the Trump White House and in the State Department among the political people. But she just was not a serious ambassador. She had literally no foreign policy experience. With that said, I recently spoke with a very senior Republican Party official who was also a senior member of the Trump campaign. This is a nationally known figure. And he told me an absolutely fascinating story. He said that Henry McMaster, who is now the governor of South Carolina, was the lieutenant governor during the Trump campaign. And Henry McMaster was the first elected official in America to endorse Donald Trump. So when Trump won the election, the campaign went to McMaster and said, what do you want? What do you want for your reward? And McMaster said, I want to be governor of South Carolina. Well, Nikki Haley was already the governor of South Carolina. So you need to get Nikki Haley out. Well, what does Nikki Haley want? Nikki Haley wants to be president of the United States. And what's holding her back is that she had no foreign policy
experience.
Yeah. So she said, sure, she'll resign as governor of South Carolina if she can either have UN ambassador or Secretary of State. Well, Trump already had ideas for Secretary of State. Giuliani, Christie, Tillerson, Petraeus. He wasn't going to make her Secretary of State, but he was willing to make her ambassador to the United Nations. So she took that job, which prepares her now for 2024, and McMaster became governor of South Carolina. So why she resigned this early in the term doesn't make sense to me. I think she really was not effectual at the United Nations, and she probably wants to make some money before she eventually runs for president. But in the long term, I think that's the plan. Now, she did say today, after her meeting with the president, that she was going to campaign for Republicans in the midterm elections, which any potential presidential candidate would do, because that's how you collect political chits.
Exactly.
And second, she said that she would campaign with the president in 2020. Well, that's going to continue to raise her profile and make her appealing, or more appealing, to Republican Party activists in advance of 2024. I think she knows exactly what she's doing.
Except when it came to being a UN ambassador.
and there she was utterly clueless.
Oh, my goodness. Any sort of intellectual curiosity, no sort of policy.
Oh, yeah.
Policy heft to it, none of that at all. None of that at all. Well, John, I thank you for your insights today. I mean, they have been extremely illuminating, and we appreciate all the hard work you have done and all the hard work you are doing. I look forward to having you on for the 5th time sometime soon. And ladies, ladies and gentlemen,
and thank you for what you do. This is really great.
Yeah, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this was John Kiriakou. If you got the chance, as I said before, get the book, Doing Time Like a Spy, How the CIA Taught Me to Survive and Thrive in Prison.